Round 2 of Utah Motorcycle Law's Master of the Mountains was substantially better than Round 1 for me. On the drive down to Utah Motorsports Campus from Missoula, I stopped in at Vortex Racing and picked up a new clutch lever knuckle to replace the one that I broke last time that I was at the track in Utah. It was quite nice to save the shipping cost, plus SBA racers get a discount on Vortex parts, which is super cool. Thanks for sponsoring the racing, and I really appreciate the parts that I've got from you guys. Friday night, after unloading my truck and getting my pit set up, I went on the track walk. Fortunately for me and anyone else who went on the walk, it was guided by Shane Turpin, a very accomplished racer and coach. The lines he showed us were what I tried to stick to closely throughout the weekend, and they substantially improved my riding. The riding started off on yet another cold morning. This time it was raining off and on. This would be my first wet track riding experience. I'm on Michelin Pilot Power 2 CTs, which are a track day ready street tire, typical DOT, and I was using no warmers. I was very much not going to be heading out and sending it hard. I just wanted to learn what the track would feel like with these new, different conditions. Sorry about the camera angle. I fixed it for the last race of the weekend after finally reviewing some of the footage. Everything else is pretty much just sky, dials, and a bit of the track to the left and right, plus a smidgen through the windscreen when I'm leaned over. It is what it is. I've got it figured out for next time. The GoPro I have doesn't have a screen on it. Unfortunately, in my practice session, another rider went down before I could get in a flying lap or figure out what the track conditions would be like. Some of the slowness in response to seeing the waving yellow going into turn 1 was my uncertainty about the track condition. Clearly, the track was slick enough to take out one rider, which might mean that it could get me too. It was also an influence of seeing where the bike and rider were on track. They were probably 5 to 10 feet away from Shane's suggested line. By the time I had made it to the Black Rock hairpin, the red flag was out for the session. After listening to hours of IndyCar practice, I forgot that the red flag procedure between the two is different. I thought that if a red flag came out, you could get back in line and the time of the red flag was just subtracted from your session. That's not the case at USBA. When you get red flagged, the session is over, and when they go green, it's whatever the next session was, assuming it's practice. Races can be different. This meant that by accident, I lined up in the fast group practice rather than the quote medium group, which is really the slow group, but whatever, names are names. Lucky for me, only 2 of the other racers went out because one more person who I presume did the same thing incorrectly went out with me. I don't know why everybody didn't want to go out in this session. I assume it has to do with the conditions being wet and rainy, and they didn't want to deal with swapping to rain tires. It was very up in the air whether or not the day would be wet or dry, or if rain tires would be right, or dry tires, or DOTs, or what the situation was. At the end of the session, I came in with a 229. That's all that really mattered. Pretty unsurprising. At least all of my laps got faster throughout the session. I was getting more comfortable with the track surface and understanding where I needed to be based on Shane's track notes. Session 2 was more of the same, just figuring out where the line was. While this was the second time I've run the West track, the first time I had a very much less than ideal bike with unreliable brakes and a faulty ignition coil in the last couple of sessions. I also had the new information and reference points from Shane Turpin, clearly better than anything I was going to figure out in a rookie orientation class. Some of the critical points I picked out for myself were a big weed, then fading out to the outside edge of the middle track segment in turn 2, Dreamboat. This one actually needs to change, not because it is bad or wrong, but because there's a good chance that it can and will change. Weeds don't always grow in the same spot, obviously. It will now be between the 2 big rubber marks on the curbing. The 3 points in the Black Rock hairpin where the sealant is, and then fading only out to the outside of the middle track segment. UMC is paved in 3 stripes, and the seams are fairly visible depending on where you are in the corner and the lighting. These are good placeholders when you want to maximize your track usage without running extra distance to the outside of the actual pavement and messing up how you're setting yourself up for the next turn. These screenshots are from my fixed good camera position in the last session of Sunday during my outlap, so the bike's not exactly where it should be all the time because I'm not riding as smart as I should be during the outlap. And my fast lap of P2 was a 2:19. Immediately dropping 10 seconds thanks to better eyes on my reference points and primarily improving track conditions, I think. My first race of the weekend was the Open Twins and Hooligan bikes. For me, this is essentially just another practice session. I'm competing against Ducati 1290s and other proper big racing twins. This is not going to go well for a second weekend SV 650 racer. This was still a good opportunity to pick up more time, and during the session I found another 10 seconds, dropping my fast lap of the race to a 2:09. During the lunch period, it started to rain, and thunder, and lightning, and hail. Super cool, very awesome. I really do genuinely appreciate my cheapo Walmart Easy Up sticking it out and keeping me mostly dry. Luckily, it was a pretty short squall, only 15 to 30 minutes, depending on what you want to define as the start and end of it. And the active precipitation and lightning stopped before all of the on-track activity was supposed to take place, first of which was Lightweight GP. This is the race I actually want to do well in. Only 3 of us took to the grid for this one reason or another, most likely conditions changing and just not wanting to be out in gross weather for the other 2 racers that appeared during the weekend. Over the course of the race, I got much more comfortable, and the track had become more wet and cold over the lunch period, so my times had backed down at the beginning. However, my fast lap was a 2:19, and the best lap of the race by anyone was a 1:57. So I'm not particularly disappointed with the 20-second or so delta, considering that the other 2 racers were on proper rain racing tires, and they both have at least a year worth of racing on the West Circuit. I was again lapped during the only race that I actually don't want to get lapped in, so that was somewhat frustrating. It is what it is. The final race of Saturday for me was Sportsman, and it's essentially back to being a practice session. This class is open to all riders who have not raced below a certain time for each configuration of the track. However, the grid could consist of riders on 400, 600, 1000s, the 125 two-stroke that's in Lightweight GP. All of them could go out there, assuming they haven't beat that par time. It was time to call it for the day. I packed up most of my pit that could possibly blow away, so that if the pit wind picked up, it wouldn't just disappear or break stuff. I went to dinner at a local brewery, came back to the track, slept in my tent. It was much less eventful weather this time. However, there was a lantern festival happening all the way on the other side of the track from me, which meant that I could hear whatever song was playing on the main concert stage. It cost $30 a night to sleep at the track in my tent, and $90 for a Friday to Sunday camping spot in total. I'd call that pretty okay. It's not the cheapest camping ever, but whatever. If I were to book a hotel, it would be around $100 a night for anywhere that I'm willing to go sleep in a hotel, and that means I save about $200 a weekend. To me, that pays for a set of tires, or half of my entry fee, or most of the gas that I use throughout the weekend getting there and racing. It is what it is. Everybody can take their own trade-offs. I'm willing to sleep through some loud music for paying for all of my gas. It seems good. I'm just happy that it was music and not a windstorm this time. Sunday was much drier and sunnier all day. Practice 1 was a kind of sketchy practice. I was trying to learn just how close I could actually get to the curbs on the inside in particular. I have yet to touch my knee down on this bike, which I have done on the GPZ. This is one of many indications that I have body position problems to fix, some of which I will address later in the video. In pursuit of getting tighter to the curbs, I touch some of them with usually my rear wheel or both wheels. I never touched with just my front, which I think is a little funky. And that was kind of a good confidence building exercise because I learned I wouldn't crash instantly. I know generally how the bike would get upset based on how much I was hitting the curb, and I know the edge of where I can put the bike based on what I can see and what I'm observing while I ride. It was also very nice to put up a 2:02 on the last lap of practice. Practice 2 was a funky one. First, on my out lap, I watched the guy in front of me pull off between turns 1 and 2 with what seemed to be a mechanical problem. Then, on my first flying lap, I believe I found a false neutral between the second and third gear, which then mid-corner dropped into gear in a way that really disrupted the bike and kind of gave me the vibes that I was going to get high-sided all the way into oblivion. And then in the following corner, a rider went down moments before on the exit of the turn, and I took these three events over the course of essentially one lap to mean I just shouldn't be on track. I decided to park it and protect myself and protect the equipment. The whole session had bad vibes. I don't know if it got red flagged. The gentleman in the corner that did end up going down was pushing his bike to the side, so I bet he was able to get out of the way and they were able to continue the session. I just didn't want to be on track. I had no interest in taking part of whatever the problems going on were. I did not like the vibes. First race of the day for anyone is the only one that matters to me, Lightweight GP. This time there were 5 of us on the grid. This is the biggest grid in Lightweight GP so far that I had taken place in, and by virtue of showing up for 2 of the 3 races in the class that had happened, that meant that I was gridded in 3rd place. And, oh boy, who knows what's going to happen there. This was, however, my chance to lead the race. So I took it for all of 5 seconds, because the Gen 1 SV 650 has a 0 to 60 at 3.2, Ninja 400s are like 4.8, RC 390 about 4.9. I can't find a 0 to 60 for the 2-stroke Honda that guy's on, but he basically has to push start the bike because he's only got 20 foot-pounds of torque. So, hey, I got to lead. I was in first for 7 seconds. Yep, very cool. If I can get my average lap times down, I definitely have the opportunity to lead and control pretty much every race next year if I can get my average lap times down to the same region of the front runners. Purely because I can get off the line way better than anyone else in the class has a bike to get off the line. Anyway, I was immediately passed by all 4 of the other riders. I hope I didn't ruin their races. I know I'm bad and off the pace, but I'm improving significantly, and it was pretty cool that I at least had one other guy in sight for most of the lap until I went off. I am not used to being in a racing situation, like a real race situation, where it matters, and seeing another rider that I actually might have a chance to pass, like under braking or something, which is what distracted me, and it was something of a shame because I think I could have kept 4th place in sight for the whole first lap and some of the second lap. It would have been super cool. I'm going to leave this race playing in the background. It is by far my best session of the weekend, and I'm actually able to finish on the lead lap in this one. This was the first time that I completed every lap of a race. I'm very excited about how it went, and I will come back to this again shortly. On the note of how well the session went, I had been running 32 psi front and 33 psi rear for cold temperatures, or at least as cold as the tires got in between sessions. So I'd take that temperature or the pressure reading pretty much right before I went out during the second call. After the lightweight GPs, I had 35 psi in both tires after getting it on the stands. Both of the tires were around 70 degrees all over. That's in the center and on the sides, both sides. And I think some of this has to do with my fairly relaxed outlap paces, or in-lap paces. I think that the time between hard riding and being able to check the pressures is too big, and that's throwing off any of the tire pressure readings that I want so that I can get a better idea of what pressures I should be running and all of that stuff. Whatever, it is what it is, and I'll fix that in the next round. Next race that I did not get video of because I accidentally turned the camera off when I was in the pits because I thought it wasn't on, but it was. This race was something of a dumpster fire for me, however. This race was super street bike. This means that I had the bike in a different configuration than normal. You have to take off your race fairings. The bike has to be street legal within 10 minutes of coming off of the track, and you have to run with your headlights in place but with tape, your license plate, and a couple of other things on the bike, meaning that you don't use your race fairings. And that kind of messed with me, and it's also a bit of a pain in the butt to switch from fairings to not fairing street bike to fairings again with the equipment that I have on my machine, just because it's such a trash pile of a bike. But the more important part is that my riding was pretty bad the whole race. I did very poorly. I had to use the paved runoff section in the D's for turn 8, and I went off on the exits of Scream and Precision. After doing all of these things, I decided it was time to park it before I hurt myself making more stupid decisions. All 3 of the offs were for different reasons though, so I wasn't making the same mistake twice, which is good, but still bad that I was making mistakes this big. Running along in the D's was because I got fixated on the rider who had just passed me. My goal was, I'm going to emulate them and do whatever they do. However, because they're a much better rider, my emulation of theirs was poor, so I braked much later than they did and turned in much earlier than they did, and I just went wide. I went wide into the paved runoff, came back on track, and in turn 9 of the same lap, I went wide again because I had changed the way that I was approaching the turn, right? I come out of 7, I go off, so I get back onto the track, and I can go through 8 essentially faster because I was set up in a better position, which just tells me that I was taking the D's all wrong. But I come out of 8 at a much faster position, and I go into 9 going faster. So when I braked at my regular brake mark, I was going faster when I got to the end of where I would brake, and when I hit a bump that exists in turn 9, I was not as stood up on the bike as Shane Turpin had said, oh yes, if you come through here like this, you can have the bike stood up and this bump won't mess with you that much. That advice, super helpful. The way that he wants you to go through 9, extremely fast, very helpful. I failed to do it this time. It unsettled the bike. I tried to stick with it on the gas, and I went wide off into the dirt for a little bit, got back onto the track, zoomed around, whatever it was what it was. On the very next lap, I went wide in Scream. I believe this is the fastest corner on any layout of UMC other than the full layout versions of Fast and Faster. And I messed this one up because that I decided that I was just going to full send it. This was purely I'm going to do this as fast as I can. I'm going to see how it turns out. And it kind of didn't work out, but whatever. In Workout, which is the turn before Scream, I just decided I'm not going to brake. I'm just going to roll off, which is probably what I should be doing. But the real mistake came with my turn-in point for Scream. I turned in 2 or 3 candy cane stripes earlier than I should have and where I had been because I was going faster in the previous corner, and that messed with what I was seeing. It messed with where my reference points were, and so I was afraid, basically. I was afraid, and I went, oh man, I'm going to miss the turn, and I turned in early, and because I turned in early, I touched the inside curb, which, once again, basically I hit a bump, and that pushed me wide and unsettled me, and again, this is the only mistake I made twice. I tried to stick with it, which, keeping your foot in it or staying wide open is, you could call that a mistake or not. It was only a mistake because I went off, is how I'm going to look at it. I went off, and I relaxed, rolled with it. Lucky for me, there were no big bad bumps. I kept it upright, got back on the pavement, decided, yeah, I'm good. I've got away with at least a few things. One time trying to learn from another rider in a pretty reasonable way, and then 2 stupid mistakes, one of which was purely ego. So I decided it's time to park it and swap back to race fairings. My best lap during this one was a 2:13. None of it was good. It was all bad. It was a learning experience. The final race of the weekend was another Sportsman race. This time, I did not mess up my grid lineup, so that was neat. And it's also an opportunity to point out that I can, in fact, launch moderately okay to keep up with the slow 600 riders out of the box. Really, I overslowed into turn 1, and while this plays out, I do have some notes about my tire pressures. I did not like how they behaved at this point. I had spoken with the Michelin vendor and decided that I was going to change my pressures at their suggestion. The suggestions that they had made was to run 31 front and 29 rear, and using those pressures when I came off track from the Sportsman race, in which I only got 6 laps and had a too slow of an off lap, or an out lap, in lap, whatever, to probably get an accurate reading of pressure and temperatures, but I tried to. The pressures were both 34, front and rear, and the front tire was 120 Fahrenheit in the center, 100 on the edges. The rear was 100 in the center and 95 on the edges. I've also taken some footage of my tires when I came off after the lightweight GP. The reason for this is that I felt very comfortable, very stable. It was my best session of the weekend, so I took video of spinning the tire. Might be playing right now, might not, whatever. And I'm going to show it to people who I trust and I believe they know how to read tires. And I'm going to show them those, and I'm going to show the tires as they currently are, which is just after this Sportsman race. That's how they still are in the back of my truck. I'm going to ask them to see, hey, what do you think? And hopefully their suggestions can get me into a better, more comfortable zone with the rubber. There is one more critical thing throughout this weekend that has been absolutely biting me, and that is the fatigue that I'm getting from the ergonomic situation on the bike. The bars that I have are way too low. When I had initially set up the bike, I did bad math for the front suspension setup, which put the forks too high up in the triple tree, and the forks that I have taper from 50 to 48. They're 2006 Gixxer forks, and the 48 millimeter stanchion section was what was going to be available for clip-ons to secure around, because there was not enough of the 50 millimeter region underneath the top triple. After riding it like that for maybe 5 blocks, I decided, wow, this is terrible. I need to check my math. Check my math. My math was wrong, and I fixed it, put it back to how it actually should be, which now feels great. But the bars are just insanely low because they're probably an inch below the bottom of the triple clamp. So now I have some 50 millimeter clip-ons in the mail, and hopefully that will help sit me back up, and that different set of clip-ons will also possibly mess with where I need to put my rear sets. I'm going to spend a weekend or a night readjusting all of my levers and bars and pegs and everything. And hopefully this will help me out with fatigue. I think this should also help me out with the biggest consistent problem that I have had with this bike, and that is
his lazy steering started the whole mess.
That is not how the bike tips in. That is not how it wants to flick. That is my steering inputs. The steering input that I apply to the machine is lackadaisical and lazy. Last year, I had been riding a sporty UJM style 1980s GPZ 550 at the local track. That bike has very upright and wide bars, and it gives you lots of leverage, and your arm naturally wants to move in the same plane as the steering axis. With the bars on the SV being so low, your arms and your forearms and your wrists and everything, all of your body, is out of alignment to apply your steering pressure on the same plane as the steering head axis, and that makes your steering inputs just sad and vague and not sharp. It just makes it a dull, blunt bat instead of a sharp blade. So hopefully moving this up will change my body geometry, the ergonomics of my seating position, so that I can actually steer much more precisely and improve my counter steering by having my arms and my body in a much more natural position to steer along the steering head axis. I'm hoping. If that fixes the problem, I genuinely expect to just find a free multiple seconds, because instead of slowly fading the bike into turns, I can make a snappy turn in and actually cut and make stuff like Scream way better instead of, okay, cool, I'm gonna hope that it turns enough, and instead I'll be able to turn, boom, go, zoom, full throttle, let's go. Hopefully that's the case. We'll see. Before getting too disconnected from on-track stuff, I want to go over what my best lap looked like this weekend. Coming into 10, start braking just a bit before the outside candy cane, turn in just to the outside of that sealer patch on the crack, apex just before the cone, or just after the cone and just before the tree of tire marks on the curb, stay way off the bike to the inside and stand it up for full throttle, let off the gas, get on the brakes at about the 3 mark, this is still pretty dang early, trail and coast to the bump, should be trailing all the way to the bump instead of coasting, whatever, it is what it is, confidence will come. At the bump, on the gas, finish turning, stand up the bike, get to mid-track, slight roll-off at the start of the outside curve for Dreamboat, probably should be able to full throttle this, apex at the weed about 4 stripes from the end, flow out to mid-track, roll-off, no brakes from the first left, finish flowing out mid-curb, upshift, cut across Scream just before the end of the outside curb, let the bike push out all the way to the outside of the track, on the brakes at the start of the curb, blow out with the track as it expands, cut across around the outside of the 2 sealer patches and just on the edge of the curb on the inside, only flow out to half track. Turn from way deep in the corner in order to straighten out over the bump. Stay wide and straight line part of the D's. No brakes, just a roll off for 8. Deep turn in for 9, so going over the bump is nice and vertical. Then you can have more gas. Brakes just before the outside curb, wheels just to the outside of the sealer, apex just after the cone, and flow out so you join the main straight at about the midpoint of the track connection. All gas all the way to the 2 board, and that's pretty much my best lap of the weekend. It was a 2:01.985. I can very easily see a sub 2 here. There are so many spots to fix, but I can see all of that time just getting picked up in turn 1. Just coasting further essentially into the corner and trail braking more or something to that effect. I hope you understand what I'm getting at. That could easily find me the 2 seconds. The West course is all about making time in turn 10 and the turns 1 through 5 complex. 6, 7, 8, and 9 only exist to distract you and mess you up in between those important fast points. The front straight and that fast flowing front section. I think this belongs here. I got 3rd in the lightweight GP on the whole weekend. All of the 2-day classes positions are awarded based on season points, but just over the weekend. Since I finished both races, I pretty much automatically got 3rd because 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in the first race were all that raced. I got 3rd, and in the second race, 1st and 2nd were the same people. 3rd and 4th were 2 people who didn't race in the first race, and I got 5th. So I got 3rd place points plus 5th place points, and nobody else who wasn't 1-2 had any more points. So, boom, 3rd place on the weekend. Cool. I do see this one as a real 3rd place, unlike the last time, because I actually showed up and raced when the other 2 didn't. Whether that's the rain or they weren't there or whatever, seems good. Rather than the last one where a guy who got a tiny split-second jump start advantage finished minutes in front of me and on the lead lap. Those are 2 very different 3rd places in my mind. The end of the day on Sunday was pretty chill. I helped put away the air fence. It went much more smoothly this time. People were substantially less scared off by rain and snow because it wasn't there and it was sunny and it was, not fun, but it also wasn't terrible to just pick up some cubes, put them on a trailer, and put them in a Connex. After that, I packed up my pit and set up in the bathroom near my tent to watch the Indy 500. I had planned to Chromecast it, but the TV that I had and the Chromecast that I had were not cooperating with my phone's hotspot, so I just watched it on my phone. It was a pretty excellent 500 in the bathroom at UMC, and I had my beer and my camping folding chair and my phone charging on the bathroom counter. So, Indy 500, baby. Otherwise, the remainder of the weekend was pretty chill. I drove home, unloaded my stuff, found a box on my porch from Shoei, and it was the RF 1400 that I had crashed in round 1. I sent it back for a helmet inspection, and the way that I figured it was it's a $700 helmet, shipping is $50 or so. If 1 in 14 helmets that I send back is still good to go, I came out ahead, or even. Lucky for me, according to the inspection, this helmet is, quote, sound and should perform as originally designed. This means that I now have 2 helmets that are good to go for racing, and I have a legitimate spare instead of a sort of spare. I think that I will be sticking with the HJC for track stuff, just because it hasn't been any kind of altercation with the ground, and I will street the 1400, because it is somewhat more comfortable, and while I did talk about comfort on the bike with the bars, this helmet comfort is much different from I literally can't steer the bike as sharply as I'd like to, versus, this pad feels, it feels like a $20 piece of foam instead of a $3 piece of foam. There's a bit of a difference there. They're both Snell. As far as I'm concerned, they should both protect my dome just as well. It is what it is. That pretty much does it for my round 2 recap. Round 3 is slated for July 6th and 7th, again on the West track, and I hope to break into sub 2. I might even be able to see another lightweight GP rider going into the second lap or further throughout the race. It's a rookie year, and learning is just getting started. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy.